There's something profoundly sad about watching greatness destroy itself. I'm not talking about a sudden catastrophic failure. I'm talking about the slow, agonizing collapse of something that should have been magnificent. The Austin Maxi is one of those stories that still hurts even decades later, because everyone involved knew they had something special, and then they systematically destroyed it. If you were around in 1969, you remember the optimism. Britain had just created the largest automotive conglomerate outside of America by merging Austin, Morris MG, Triumph, Rover, and Jaguar into British Land. The government championed this as Britain's answer to Detroit's giants. The Austin Maxi was supposed to be the vanguard of this revolution, a thoroughly modern family car that would make Ford and Valhalla look hopelessly outdated. Think about what Britain was like in the late 60s. Families wanted more from their cars than basic transportation. They wanted space, comfort, practicality, and style. The traditional British saloon was beginning to look tired next to innovative designs from France and Italy. The Renault 16, launched in 1965, had shown that families would embrace a hatchback if it offered genuine practicality. The Maxi should have been Britain's response. Designed by Alec Iziganis, the genius behind the Mini and the 1100, it featured genuinely advanced engineering. Transverse engine, front-wheel drive, 5 doors, a proper hatchback, and Britain's first 5-speed gearbox in a family car. British Leyland invested approximately £8 million in development, equivalent to roughly $140 million today. This wasn't some half-hearted effort. This was betting big on the future. But here's what makes this story so painful. The Maxi didn't fail because the concept was wrong. It failed because British Land took every promising element and compromised it into oblivion. The engineering was sabotaged by cost-cutting. The build quality was destroyed by industrial chaos. The marketing was undermined by a product that simply wasn't ready for customers. This isn't just the story of one failed car. It's the story of how British Land, and by extension the entire British volume car industry, committed slow suicide through management incompetence, union militancy, and organizational dysfunction. The Maxi was patient zero in an epidemic that would eventually kill names like Austin, Morris, and Triumph. Section 5. The long decline to extinction. British Leyland continued producing the Maxi until July 8, 1981. 12 painful years of building a car that never achieved commercial success. Total production reached approximately 472,000 units across all variants. British Leyland had anticipated building 1.2 million Maxis. They achieved less than 40% of that target. By the mid-1970s, the Maxi had become something of a national joke. Stand-up comedians made Maxi gearbox jokes on television. The car that was supposed to showcase British engineering, innovation had become a symbol of everything wrong with British industry. The pricing story tells its own tale of decline. The base model Maxi 1500 cost £979 at launch in 1969. By 1980, the equivalent model cost £3,695. This price inflation substantially exceeded the general rate of inflation and reflected British Leyland's desperate financial situation. Yet, even at these inflated prices, the company was losing money on every unit sold. Contemporary reviews of late production Maxis show how far the car had fallen behind. When Car Magazine compared a 1979 Maxi to a Volkswagen Golf GTI and a Ford Escort 2000 rupees, the Maxi finished a distant third. The testers acknowledged that British Land had finally sorted most of the mechanical problems. But the fundamental design was simply outdated. Export sales were particularly dismal. Approximately 100,000 Maxis were exported during the 12-year production run, less than a quarter of total production. The Maxi was essentially a stay-at-home product, unable to compete effectively, even in friendly Commonwealth markets. The replacement for the Maxi, the Austin Ambassador, introduced in 1982, somehow managed to be even worse. It lasted only until 1984. The Ambassador sold approximately 37,000 units in 3 years. A catastrophic failure that demonstrated British Land had learned nothing from the Maxi debacle. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Nostalgia Rides for more legendary cars. Section 4. The broader catastrophe at British Land. Max's failure represented organizational dysfunction that infected virtually every aspect of British Land's operations throughout the 1970s. The Same problems appeared in model after model. The industrial relations situation became catastrophic. According to historical research, between 1946 and 1964, 44% of all strikes in the British motor industry occurred within BMC's plants compared to 11% for Ford of Britain. This pattern continued and worsened under British Land. The most infamous example was Derek Robinson, known as Red Robbo, who was union convener at the Longbridge plant, led 523 separate walkouts during a 30-month period in the late 1970s. Regardless of whose fault the disputes were, the result was production chaos that made it impossible for British Land to build cars reliably. According to government reports, British Leyland's productivity in the mid-1970s averaged 6 to 7 cars per employee per year, compared to 12 for European competitors like Volkswagen. By the end of the 70s, Toyota was achieving approximately 60 cars per employee per year. Management's response revealed deeper dysfunction. Rather than acknowledging fundamental issues and investing in proper solutions, British Leyland executives repeatedly announced minor improvements while insisting the car was fundamentally sound. Lord Donald Stokes, chairman of British Leyland, told the media in October 1969 that he anticipated no major modifications to the Maxi and expected it to remain in production for at least a decade. The competition studied British Leyland's failures carefully. Ford of Britain specifically analyzed the Maxi's problems when developing the Cortina marque. They identified quality control failures, the tendency to prioritize clever engineering over reliable functionality, and disastrous industrial relations as weaknesses to avoid. The Japanese manufacturers studied British Land even more carefully. By 1975, British Leyland was bankrupt. The government nationalized the company to prevent the loss of 180,000 jobs. But nationalization couldn't fix the underlying problems. The industrial disputes continued. The quality problems persisted. The market share continued its inexorable decline. Section 3. The desperate rescue attempts that came too late. British Land realized they had a crisis. In December 1969, they launched a crash modification program to address the Maxi's most obvious problems. According to Austin Morris sales director Filmer Paradise speaking to dealers in May 1970, the original car had some niggling faults. That might be the greatest understatement in automotive history. The company attacked multiple problems simultaneously. They improved sound insulation to reduce cabin noise. They added better quality interior trim materials. They revised the front grille design and added bodyside trim strips. Most critically, they completely redesigned the gearbox linkage mechanism starting with October 1970 production. In October 1970, British Leyland introduced the Maxi 1750 powered by a larger 1,748 cm version of the S-Series engine producing 82 brake horsepower. According to period road tests, the 1750 could reach 97 miles per hour and required approximately 13 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour, respectable, if still not exciting numbers. The improvements helped. By February 1970, market penetration increased to 2.2%. By April, it climbed above 3%. But 3% market share was still disastrous for a car that was supposed to capture 7 or 8%. The company had spent £8 million on development for a product capturing less than half its minimum projected sales. In 1972, British Leyland introduced the Maxi HL, a highline variant with a twin carburetor version of the 1750 engine, producing 95 brake horsepower. This genuinely sporty version could reach approximately 100 miles per hour, but by 1972 the Maxi's reputation was already established. Car buyers had long memories. The company made another attempt at revitalization in 1973, replacing the controversial Cortic steering wheel with a conventional round design and updating the dashboard layout to be more intuitive. These changes addressed legitimate complaints, but they came 4 years too late. The people who might have bought Maxis in 1970 had already purchased Cortinas, Victors, or increasingly imported cars from Germany and Japan. According to British Leyland's internal sales analysis from 1975, the Maxi attracted buyers only when dealers offered substantial discounts. The average transaction price ran approximately 15% below the official retail price. Dealers were essentially paying customers to take the cars. The The peak year for Maxi sales in the UK was 1972 when approximately 54,000 units found buyers. The Ford Cortina Mark III, launched in 1970, sold over 1 million units during its production run. The Vauxhall Victor Fio consistently outsold the Maxi. Even the Morris Marina, a deliberately cheap car that journalists widely criticized, sold better than the supposedly innovative Maxi. Section 2, where everything went catastrophically wrong. The problems with the Maxi weren't subtle quirks. They were fundamental failures of basic functionality that should never have made it past prototype testing. The gearbox became the Maxi's most infamous disaster. Extinction designed a cable-operated shift mechanism that worked reasonably well in prototypes. But British Land management, obsessed with cost reduction, insisted on using a cheaper rod-operated linkage system borrowed from components designed for completely different applications. The result was shift quality that Autocar magazine diplomatically described as requiring familiarization. The gear selector felt like stirring porridge with a broomstick while wearing heavy gloves. Motor Magazine's road test in 1970 documented that their test team required an average of 12 separate attempts to successfully engage reverse gear. Char attempts. This wasn't a quirky characteristic. This was fundamental failure of basic mechanical function that somehow passed through British Land's quality control and reached paying customers. Dealers reported customers who test drove the Maxi frequently returned to purchase Ford Cortinas instead. The engine presented different but equally serious problems. While the overhead camshaft EE engine was technically more advanced than push-rod competitors, British Leyland's cost-cutting meant it shared pistons and connecting rods with the ancient B-series push-rod engine. This compromise limited the breathing efficiency the sophisticated cylinder head promised. The 1500 model managed a pedestrian top speed of 92 miles per hour and required approximately 14 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour from standstill. The build quality issues ran far deeper than most people realize. British Leyland's factories were plagued by industrial disputes during this entire period. According to company production records, the Cowie plant that assembled the Maxi experienced over 300 separate strikes between 1969 and 1975. Cars rolled off the assembly line with loose trim panels, misaligned body panels, electrical systems that didn't work properly, and sometimes missing components entirely. The original interior design somehow managed to be simultaneously austere and bizarre. The dashboard layout defied conventional logic, with minor controls scattered seemingly at random. The headlight switch was positioned where most drivers expected windscreen wiper controls, while the wiper controls were moved to a completely non-intuitive location. The steering wheel, officially called the quartic wheel because of its squared-off design, looked like something from science fiction. British Leyland apparently believed this represented sophisticated Italian styling. Instead, it just looked odd and proved awkward to use. By September 1969, just 5 months after launch, the Maxi's market share had collapsed to a disastrous 2.2%. By November, British Land reduced production from the planned 2,000 units per week to just 1,000. By December 1969, market share fell further to 1.4%. 4%, a mere 681 cars sold in the entire month. Ford was selling approximately 6,000 Cortinas per week during this same period. Section 1. The brilliant concept that deserved better. When Alec Izagonis began developing what would become the Maxi in 1965, he wasn't just designing another family car, he was attempting to revolutionize the entire segment. Izagonis had already proven his genius with the Mini and the 1100. He understood something fundamental. If you package a car intelligently, you can give customers far more utility in a smaller, more efficient package. The Maxi internally coded ADO14 embodied this philosophy completely. The transverse engine layout would maximize interior space. The 5-door hatchback would provide loading flexibility that traditional saloons couldn't match. The 5-speed gearbox would deliver refined motorway cruising that 4-speed competitors lacked. British Leyland projected the Maxi would capture minimum 4% of the British market, possibly rising to 7 or 8% once word-of-mouth recommendations took hold. The S-Series engine was all new, featuring overhead camshaft design when most British family cars still used ancient pushrod engines. The initial 1,485 cm version produced 70 brake horsepower. More significantly, British Leyland designed the engine specifically for transverse installation with the gearbox mounted in line rather than beneath the engine. The 5-speed gearbox deserves particular attention because it was genuinely rare in 1969. Most family cars offered 4-speed manuals at best. The Maxi's fifth gear was essentially an overdrive, reducing engine speed at motorway cruising to improve fuel economy and reduce noise. According to period road tests, fifth gear provided approximately 19.5 miles per hour per 1,000 revolutions per minute. The body design prioritized functionality over style. Isigenis convinced British Leyland to give him a 106-inch wheelbase, quite long for a car, only 168 in overall. This wheel at each corner layout maximized interior space and improved handling. The 5-door hatchback meant you could fold the rear seats completely flat, creating cargo space that rivaled much larger estate cars. British Leyland priced the Maxi at £979, including purchase tax at launch in April, £1,969. This positioned it against the Ford Cortina M2 at approximately £850 and the Vauxhall Victor FD around £875. The Maxi was slightly more expensive, but British Leyland argued the 5-door configuration, hatchback versatility, and 5-speed gearbox justified the premium. So, why did this promising concept turn into catastrophe? Because every clever engineering decision was undermined by cost-cutting compromises and organizational dysfunction that bordered on sabotage. So, what's the final verdict on the Austin Maxi? For anyone who worked in British motor manufacturing during this period, it's a case study in how organizational dysfunction can destroy even the most promising concepts. The Maxi's basic formula was absolutely correct. Volkswagen proved this with the Golf, which became one of the most successful cars in European history. Using essentially the same concept, the Renault 16 achieved 1,845,959 sales between 1965 and 1980 using a similar formula. The tragedy is that British Land had everything needed to make the Maxi successful. They had the engineering talent. Alec Isigenis was a genuine genius. They had the manufacturing capacity. British Leyland controlled approximately 40% of the British market when the merger happened. They had the distribution network. Austin and Morris dealers were everywhere, in Britain and throughout the Commonwealth. What they lacked was the organizational competence to execute properly, the management wisdom to prioritize quality over short-term cost savings, the industrial relations framework to build cars consistently well, the market understanding to realize that launching a product before it's ready destroys its reputation permanently. For those of us who remember the 1970s British motor industry, the Maxi represents the most painful kind of failure, the preventable kind. What if British Leyland had delayed the launch 6 months to sort the gearbox properly? What if they'd invested in quality control rather than slashing costs? What if management had listened to engineers rather than accountants? We'll never know the answers to those questions, but we do know what actually happened. The Maxi failed. British Leyland collapsed despite government bailouts. The British volume car industry essentially disappeared from Austin, Morris, and Triumph, building millions of cars annually, to virtually nothing in just 2 decades. The direct line from the Maxi's failure in 1969 to the extinction of MG Rover in 2005 is uncomfortable but undeniable. Each failure built on previous failures. Each quality problem reinforced negative perceptions. Each strike made customers less willing to trust British cars. If you lived through this era, if you owned a Maxi, if you worked on them or sold them, please share your experiences in the comments below. Those of us who remember need to tell these stories before they're forgotten. The Maxi's failure contains lessons that extend far beyond the automotive industry. If you found this examination of British automotive decline informative, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. I'll be creating more deep dives into the cars and the companies that shaped and sometimes destroyed the industry we love. Thank you for watching, and remember, the Austin Maxi was supposed to save British Land. Instead, it became Exhibit A in the case study of how to kill a car company. The tragedy is that it didn't have to be this.